It's time for the Engaged Club, the podcast for club managers and operators that strive to create loyal and connected members, guests, and customers. Here are the two guys with the club management and digital marketing advice you need to realize your club's potential. Jim Hope and Roger Kincaid.
Hey, welcome back. It's me. I'm Roger Kincaid. I'm the marketing and the sales guy from Off Course Golf. Our website is offcourse.golf.
I'm Jim Hope, and I'm the GM of the Derrick Golf and Winter Club. And this podcast is supported by the Canadian Society of Club Managers.
What are we getting into today, Jim? I know that governance is always something that you're passionate about talking about and helping people through. And you wanted to drill down a little bit more into club governance today.
I did, yeah. And I think there's sort of two components to club governance. There's club governance is one big piece, and it's made up of a bunch of different components. And one of the components I wanted to talk about today was the nominating committee and what their role is in a club. And we've talked about this in previous podcasts, but probably at a little bit of a higher level than where I want to go to today. I want to really drill into it today and talk about the importance and the role of the nominating committee.
Yeah, have at her. This is a good one for me because I don't really know what a nominating committee is or does yet, but I'm going to learn that. You can probably gloss over that for our club managers who are well familiar with it. But where do you start with this, Jim?
Well, I was going to use a hockey analogy or just a sports analogy. Can you imagine if you were drafting a sports team, and you didn't have a scouting department?
Okay.
That the GM of the team or somebody, the owner of the team, just kind of went around, good looking kid. Let's see if he wants to play for us over here, and yeah, I know his mom and dad. They're awesome people. Let's see if he wants or she wants to play on our team as well. And then at the end of the day, you look and you got these 12 players in your team, and none of them fit in. They don't understand who you are as a team. They don't even understand the league that you're playing in, and they don't know what it is that they're supposed to be bringing to the team in order for you to be successful. And you wonder why you're not successful. And lots of clubs operate under that kind of a premise where, they need to find three spots. Most clubs are operating with 9 directors who sit for a 3-year term. So every year you're looking for 3 directors. Some clubs want to nominate a slate. So they just want to nominate the 3 for the 3 vacancies that they have. Others feel that they need to nominate 5. They don't want to do 4 because then you have one loser in the election. So they want to bring a minimum of 5 names forward. So there's 2 losers in the election. Today at clubs, it's harder to find volunteers in all aspects, both committees and for boards. It becomes a bit of a popularity contest, or whoever puts their hand up first is going to be nominated to run for the board. And in all cases, even if a club has an active nominating committee who may just be putting forward a slate, most club articles would also allow for somebody independent of the nominating committee to run for the board of directors. My experience has been that in most cases, very few people run from that position because they know that their chances of success are probably pretty slim if they're going up against 3 candidates that were put forward by a nominating committee, and it might even be obvious on the ballot that goes out to the members prior to the annual meeting that these are the 3 from the nominating committee and these are the 1 or 2 that are running from the floor. And the members who don't know any of the, say, 5 candidates that are running will take the word of the nominating committee because there's a trust factor that's involved automatically because they're previous experience at the club and they're trying to bring forward the best candidates, that those people are going to get elected. So the 2 that are running independent of the nominating committee, don't stand a chance. So often they don't run. And then you just get a slate that's put forward. And it's interesting in clubs today because, there still are discussions about, that's an old boys network, right? They're just bringing their 3 friends forward and, the balance of us don't have a chance to get onto the board, even though they could run from the floor. And in most clubs, at least ones that have a strong nominating committee structure, which I'd like to talk about in this pod, it's as far from an old boys network as you can get. And it's interesting that I think most of the managers listening to this podcast will all be nodding their head going, yeah, like I know. I wish that's the way it was at our club, but it isn't. And then the question becomes, how do we get it that way at our club? And I'd like to close with that discussion on, so if this isn't who you are today, if this isn't the process that you're using, then how do you get to a point where it is what you do? Mm-hmm. And one of the first steps that a nominating committee needs to do is determine what are the skills that we need to fill on the board, and that backfills itself from a board skills matrix that you would have done with your current board. So if you've got 6 directors that are left at your club, and you're looking for 3, you would do a skills matrix and find out the skills that those 6 directors have, and find out what vacancies you might have that you need to fill. And say you don't have a CPA on the board, or you don't have a lawyer on the board, or you don't have somebody with construction or marketing experience, and marketing is something you want to put a bit of an emphasis onto, or you have a construction project that you'd like to have somebody with some expertise to be able to, lend a hand to the management team in the execution of that project. From that skills matrix, you would determine that that's what you're looking for. And then when you seek nominations, when you go to the membership and ask for nominations, you might even list that these are the skills that we're looking for the board. So if you don't have those skills, somebody might say, I don't even want to apply. But if someone had those skills, they'd say, hey, maybe it's my turn to step up and help my club. So you've made notice to your members that you're seeking applications for the board. You receive those applications. And part of that process would also be including to those nominees or potential nominees a copy of your board policy manual and your code of conduct. You want them to understand that if they get onto the board, this is the operating system for our club. Here's your responsibilities. Here's management responsibilities. And you understand that before you get on the board, as opposed to being surprised that it's different than what you thought it was when you get on the board. I had a situation at a club once where the first board meeting, and it's often at most clubs, your very first board meeting with a new board, they'd all receive a copy of the board code of conduct, which is a 1-page and talks about the things that you will and you won't do as a board member, and you sign off on that so that everybody is operating under the same pretense. Everyone's operating with a clear understanding as to what their role is, what the decorum of the meetings are, and how they're supposed to behave. And I had 4 out of 9 directors who wouldn't sign it.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've got 4 out of 9 that won't sign it. The other 5 have signed it. We've got a division in our board where you've got 4 on one side, you've got 4 on the other, and then we had this 9th director who we called Switzerland because he really sat right in the middle all the time. And our president, who was just a fantastic individual and really understood board dynamics, wouldn't bring anything forward unless he knew that Switzerland was on our side for the vote, because he knew we were going to get 4 against on the other side. Wow. It would have been interesting if the 4 people who did not sign the board code of conduct, I don't know if we would have done anything differently, but it sure would have been nice to know prior to them being elected, when they were running, that they wouldn't have signed off on that. So you can make it mandatory at your club that in order to be nominated by the nominating committee, you'll sign off on that you've read and understand the board policy manual, and you've read and understand the code of conduct, which often is part of the policy manual, but sometimes you like to pull it and make it independent of it, just because you want to put you want to put a little more emphasis on it. And it would have been interesting for us to know that they didn't, that they weren't going to sign that. So, so again, you've got applications out. People are starting to apply for the board. They understand what their role is. They understand management's role. They've signed off on the board code of conduct, and then you have interviews. Your nominating committee interview these people to make sure that they are prepared to walk the talk and understand what their role is at the club, and have that interview just like you would if you're hiring somebody for a job. And it's as deep as a job interview would be, to make sure that you're getting that person is being truthful and honest, and you have a clear understanding as who you're getting on the board. Once they've made that selection of those 3 people, they're going to go to the membership, and they're going to be put forward as a slate to the membership, and they're going to if they're slate, they're going to be elected to the board. Mm-hmm. And now you've got 3 people that are coming onto the board that will fit the culture, have an understanding as the operations of the club, understand what their role is at the club, and will be able to assimilate themselves into the board and into the club really quickly. And one of the things that most clubs do, and I think is really important to do, is to really early on after that election, is to have a really in-depth board orientation. And that can be with your past president. It can be with your past president, current president, maybe the executive of the club, be with the general manager, and with the new directors. And you bring them, it's both at a macro and at a micro level. And what you're really trying to do is to make sure that they have a really clear understanding what the day in the life of a director looks like, understand what the process and for a board meeting is. That, we could talk about that in another podcast with regards to the consent agenda, but here's a copy of the agenda. Here's how the board process works. Here's the timeline we have for our meetings. Here's the expectation we have of you with regards to reading the information ahead of time. Often you'll take them for a tour of the club so they see the back of the house and the basement and the inner workings, and you take them over to turf care and show them what the equipment looks like, and take them to the kitchen, and you can identify some of the areas you have that you from a structural or a capital standpoint you need to work on. You present them with the budget. You go through your long-range capital budget so they're brought up to speed real quickly as to what the challenges are facing the club and what your goals are, and your plan is to help try and fund and bring those into play. And really quickly then, from the time that person's applied to that stage when they come out of that orientation, you've got somebody who fits the team, understands how the team works, is prepared to be a team player, and then understands the workings of the team and understands what they need to do going forward, so that you can be productive really quickly in that new board process. And I think that most general managers would look and they'd nod and go, "Yeah, we'd love to do that. Yeah, we'd love to do that. Yeah, we would too." But we just can't. Our club isn't like that. Our club is where the nominating chair is usually the past president. They leave it too long before they try and fulfill their role. So all of a sudden, it's a week out before the names have to be brought forward. They walk into the lounge. The first 5 hands to go up are the 5 names that are being brought forward, and then it's a crapshoot to who lands at the table that the general manager has then got to go work with along with the rest of the board. So I think if I was a GM at a club, and I'm at a club now where our nominating process is absolutely rock solid, but if I was a GM of a club that didn't have a rock solid nominating process, that really struggled with that process, and I had a time where I looked at my club and I could see that I had a majority of directors who wanted to go that way, who felt that that was what we needed to do at the club to make sure that we were bringing qualified candidates onto the board, I'd start to lay the seeds with them about what a great nominating process would look like. And they probably already have it built into their articles. They're just not implementing it the way that they could. The articles are probably open enough for them to be able to run the process any way they want, but they're just not. But if you've got what you see are some people on the board who come from the corporate structure, who know that you just can't wing this, that this is something you need to do with a rock solid process, that's the time to lay the seed with them and say, "Hey, how about we try this next year? What about we have an application process and we do the interview and we give them the board policy manual and we get them to sign off on the code of conduct ahead of time, and start that process." And it may be 2 or 3 or 4 elections before you get yourself to the point where you're doing all 6 steps properly. But I think you used the line once, which I thought was great. 5 minutes on a treadmill, you still did some exercise. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you can just get started with some people on your board who understand the need and have a desire to formulate that process and become more serious about that nominating procedures, try and lay that groundwork with them, and then hopefully that can be your first steps in setting yourself up for success in the long term.
Yeah, no kidding, Jim. That's some deep stuff. And I mean, I think maybe one of the easiest things that you can do then, if you want to sort of start laying that groundwork, is just share this episode with those members of your board that, kind of can indicate to them the direction that you believe that the club should be heading in.
You bet. And, it's a great opportunity just in your general manager report, just to have that discussion. You can come back from a conference and say, "Hey guys, just want to let you know, I was at a conference and we had a roundtable discussion on board governance. And one of the topics was the nominating committee. And here are the steps that was laid out that it seemed that the really successful clubs who had a really successful nominating process were doing. And, we're doing one of these, but, any thoughts that maybe we should implement 1, 2, 3, or 5 more, and have that discussion with the board. And if you don't have any success, this year with the discussion, have it again next year, have it again the year after. And those directors who are in their second or third terms will go, maybe he's onto something here, and this is something we should try and incorporate.
All right. Hey, Jim, like I said before, really deep stuff here. Great deep dive into this nomination committee. I certainly understand it now a lot better than I did 14 minutes ago when this episode started. So thanks for that. And thank you very much for listening to the Engaged Club podcast. If you like what you heard, you found it useful, by all means, share this episode with your fellow managers in the club business, even with those board members that you'd like to have this conversation with. Until next time, thanks for listening.
This has been the Engaged Club podcast with Jim Hope and Roger Kincaid. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. If you like what you heard, share it with your fellow club managers and operators. Until next time, thanks for listening.